Alright guys, got a special treat for you. Basically what I have is some production knives that I have to make. This is my template for the Mosquito. A lot of guys know this one. This sold very well. I had 3 of them and they sold out right away. It's already been heat treated and I already started working on the blades. Basically, and I'll save you all the details on how to cut out a blank, but you take your template, you draw it around a piece of steel, whatever it is, and then you cut it out. I might have to do some cutting on those, but that's basically how it works. It's really simple. You use a grinder or a torch or whatever, or a bandsaw, whatever you want to do. But this tutorial is going to be basically about flat grinding. I like flat grinding a lot. It's very easy to learn. It's a great, it's actually a very nice bevel. If done correctly, it'll last you forever. There is a lot of steel and a lot of sparks and a lot of stuff that goes into this, so you know, you might have to lower your audio when you know, grinding over there. But basically, you take something that looks like this. This is 3/16. It's 1095 steel. You grind a bevel on it. Okay, nice ricasso work here. I always start with 35 grit, and then you wind up with something like this. This is unheat treated, so this has to go to heat treat. Okay, and then when it comes back, I'll shine it up, pretty it up, and then it goes out. So just want to give you a little bit more tutorial on it. If you are new to knife making, there's a lot of little tips and tricks that you will learn, and the only way you'll learn is to just do it. Okay, you could ask anybody 1,000 questions. Everybody has a million different ways of doing it. In my opinion, I just learned by doing. All right, so you know, if you make a mistake, don't worry about it. It's steel. If you really have to practice, you can practice on wood. You can practice on just regular steel, which is the Home Depot steel. It has no carbon in it. It's made for welding. It's not made for knives, and just mild steel. That's what I wanted to get to. You can practice on mild steel, but honestly, the only way you learn is to make mistakes. You know, and once you learn from those mistakes, make sure that, you know, you keep practicing and practicing. That's the only way to do it. So I'll give you a couple tips during the video, and hopefully you guys learned something and pass on what you learned. All right, guys. Thanks. A lot of you guys know I have a was it KMG Metalworks grinder. This is a very high-end grinder. You don't need to have this. You can start with the 1x30. So, you know, please don't think that you need to go out and buy this to make great knives. I started on a 1x30. A lot of guys start on a 1x30. Believe me, it's not the grinders that make it work. It's you, and it's the belts. So the better the belts, the faster you grind, the less you got to stand there and make it work. This is a used belt, and I want to make sure that you guys understand why I'm using the used belt. This is a 36 grit. This is aluminum oxide. I got a deal on these aluminum oxide belts. They don't last as long, but for what I'm going to do, it's fine. This one costs about $4. You know, you can get them in packages of 10. Ideally, what you want is the Norton belts. The Norton belts are great. You actually spend a little bit more, but they last a lot longer. And they're great. They're great belts. The orange ones, the ceramic ones, are awesome. This is a junkie belt, but there's a reason why I'm using a junkie belt now. So the new belt, basically what you want to do here is, you got to realize that what I'm going to do to this blank is I am going to do a plunge cut on each side, and then I'm going to bring the bevel all the way up to where I think I need it, and then I'm going to switch belts and bring it up further, and switch belts and bring it up all the way to the top, without trying to crease the line right there. And the reason I use a used belt is because as I am putting the corner edge onto this belt, these little, I guess, grit pieces will catch onto it and they will flake off. So if I bought a brand new belt and put it on there, that's $7 of grit that's just flying all over the place and not actually cutting the steel where I needed to cut it. All right, so that's why I used a used belt to begin with to do my plunge cuts. Some things you need to know before you start is you have to think, are you going to do a Scandi grind? Are you going to do a flat grind, or are you going to do some type of saber grind? Because that will determine how you do your plunge cuts and how you use the blade, or how you drag the blade. A flat grind is nothing more than doing your plunge cut and just pulling it across straight. If you're going to pull it across straight, what will happen is your grind will come across straight, and of course you'll get to a point where it's from here and it'll look like a box cut eventually. If you're going to do a Scandi grind or a saber grind, you are not going to pull it across straight. You are going to follow the edge of the blade. Follow the edge of the blade, and you're going to do it on both sides. That's why it's a little bit more difficult when you're doing a saber grind or a Scandi grind, is because you are plunging at a 45 degrees tighter, and you have to pull this around with a steady hand. Some guys do freehand for that. They don't use a flat, they don't use a flat guard at all. They can just do it on the slack of the belt. A lot of guys just use the slack of the belt and just use their fingers and work it out that way. And you can, and it's probably a lot easier. You could also do it with a wheel instead of a flat platen. All right, this is just set up for flat grind right now, so I just want to mention that. So let me go ahead and set this thing up. I got to put ear protection and a respirator for this part. All right, guys, just make sure that your belt is tracking before you turn it on. Make sure everything's tight. I usually start it at a slow speed. Make sure that it's not going to fly off. All right, once that's set up, I put all my hearing protection, goggles on, all that stuff. So I'm going to do the plunge cut now. Just take a look and I'll show you how I do it. Alright guys, so as you can see, what I'm doing is I just dragged it along the sides, made a small little plunge cut. Okay, it's not straight yet, but it will be. A lot of guys use marking dies or they use tape. I've used tape before. I'm just going by eye now. This is not about that. This is about the flat grind. Just make sure that if you are going to put a ricasso, that it's straight on both sides, and then you can straighten it out later. But basically what I'm doing is, first thing I'm doing is knocking down the steel on this slide cut right here, knocking it down, and then what I'll do is, once the corner edge, the 45-degree angle right here is knocked down, then what I can do is use the belt to dig in and drag it across this way, and then flatten it out that way. And then that's where this tweak comes in, where you are beveling on this side, just pulling it straight across, and you can go back and forth. And you can see what I'm going to do is I am going to take this little line right here and I'm going to bring it up to about here, and then I'm going to stop. And you have to go both sides. You can't just do one side and then flip it over. You have to do a couple pulls, and just do it that way. So I'll use this belt for a while, and then I will change it to a newer belt to do my final cuts. Alright guys, so I'm going to change belts, but I just want to go over some things real quick. You'll see on this grind right here, see how I'm slowly bringing it up, and then sometimes it has this swooping in here. Alright, you'll see that on a lot of blades. You see that little swooping design right there? What that means is that as you're pulling the blade through, you're either canted too much to this side or too much to this side when you're pulling it at a certain point. And that usually happens when you're either pulling it like this or pulling it like that, or you're just not keeping it as straight as possible. The only way to straighten that is to look from this side and make sure that when you get to that point, you readjust your hand. You either pull it this way or pull it that way and flatten that swoop side out, and then give it a couple more passes on the straight, and you'll see that line will straighten out real quick. So I'm going to change my belt to a brand new belt and finish this out, and then we're going to move to a 60 grit belt. Just one thing I want to show you on these belts. I don't know if you could see it right there, but you see how the corners are worn out right there? Let's see if you can see that. Alright, that's because I use it for cuts. That's how your belt should look. If you are trying to cut in a ricasso or cut in some type of design or something like that on the flat, your belts will have wear on the corner like that. When it gets to this point, they won't cut anymore on the side, so they're only good for the flat side. At this point, I usually just throw them out, but I just wanted you guys to be aware of that. Alright, go to millimeters. Alright, so basically, you start off with your 3/16. Alright, you see that's, I don't know if I can see the light right there. Alright, you're almost at 5 millimeters right there. Okay. Then what I do is I grind it with the 36-inch. See if I get one that I just did. Try to get it to, that one I just did, sorry. Try to get it to like 1.5, I don't know if you can see that. 1.6 millimeters. And then on the 60 grit belt, see if I could get that. I'm almost at a millimeter. Okay. Look at that, 1.5, 115, something like that. Alright. And that's how I'm going to send it to heat treat. There's other arguments with that. A lot of people say, well, if you're going to do that, you have to worry about warpage and all that other stuff. And yeah, you do. But if I'm paying the heat treater, shouldn't that be his problem? It's kind of the way I look at it. Also, what happens is, before I send it to heat treat, what I like to do is buff, get it close to finish work. And sometimes you'll notice that up here, I don't know if you could see that, but it'll be a little bit thicker at the point than it will at the belly, and that's okay, that's fine, because if they do have to straighten it out, they can. They got a little bit more meat to work with, so I'm a big fan of that. And everything is, when you get to this point, this is basically polished. It doesn't have to be, all the way up to wet finish. You don't want that. 220 is about the way you want to go. So I start my belts at 36, then I do a slow grind to fix the grind. All right, so you could see this is 36 and this is 60. Notice how far up further I went. I do not want to go to the top. A lot of guys, they go all the way to the top, and then what happens is they have this little line here. And if you're going to put a handle on that, that's fine, but my handle is going to start back here. So when you look down the spine, it should be perfectly flat. If you see a divot in this area because you went too far, you brought the grind up too high. The grinds I primarily like to do are the flat grind with a convex edge. I just think they cut the best. So, I mean, that's my opinion. I have done Scandi grinds, and I know how to do saber grinds, obviously, but I think for cutting ability and field work, you can't beat it, because once you get it to this point, all you have to do is just sharpen it up real quick, and then you have a long taper all the way to here, and it makes a nice taper at the top there. Okay, you can see that. I don't know if you can see that, but that's a really nice taper. Otherwise, because the way it cuts, it'll cut from here back and it'll cut from here up, and that's really what you want for any type of field knife. So I'll give you a couple. I'll do a couple passes on the old grinder, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, that's my variable speed. All right, it's made by these guys, Genesis, whatever. Like I said, those things are not cheap; they're expensive. But this is the variable control. Okay, if you start it up, all right, See, that thing is cooking, right? You can go all the way up. I like to drag it back down. Maybe around 50, maybe halfway. And then grind from there. Alright, it's the same principle. I put on my 60 grit belt. This is a new belt. I do have used ones, but what happens is the used ones on the 60 grit, they turn into 120 grit or 100 grit because as they get used, they don't cut as well anymore. They get a little worn down, but it's okay. So I'll just recheck it, make sure I'm center, shut it off. Make sure I got my guide plate in there and then tighten that down. Safety goggles, glasses, all that stuff. At this point I don't usually use gloves. The gloves I do use on the initial cuts because there's a lot of sparks, there's a lot of steel, and it just gets everywhere and it's brutal and it's hot. So I try to use gloves. But on this I'm doing refine work. I guess one of the biggest piece of advice I can give anybody that's grinding bevels is slow the hell down. Don't be in a rush. If the baby's crying in the other room or the wife's busting your chops, stop what you're doing, do what you have to do. If it's not conducive to a knife making environment, then just don't do it that day. Do it another day. If you rush a piece of steel, you will ruin it. And that's just from experience. I'm lucky enough to have my days off during the week, so on the weekends I'm working, so it's not a big deal. In any case, so just track it, make sure it's working, put it at a low speed. Alright. Wipe all the crap off of it. So what I'm doing is I'm looking actually behind the steel. I'm not looking in front of it. I'm looking at it from behind, and that's why I have all these gooseneck lamps. I'm looking down at it to see where I am. There's not a lot of sparks, not a lot of friction. So like I said, at this point, I'm just refining it. I already cut the steel. The steel is going to tell me where I need to be. If it's thick at one point, well, I'll grind over there a little bit. If the ricasso on one side is a little too deep, this is where I fix it. Now, if your fingers are too hot, what you can do is use a push stick. I do that regularly, but what I'm trying to do here is just look over, feel the steel, and that's another reason you use a new belt, is that if you're going to use these slow speeds, a new belt is going to make it a lot easier to cut on a slower speed. If you had a used belt in here, it takes twice as long. And let's face it, a couple hours at this grinder, and it's a pain. You really just want to finish. Work on the ricasso, work on where you're at. Alright, so you can see where I'm at now. I raised the bevel a little bit. Okay, so nice even grinds right there, all the way to the top. But over here it's still a little thick, and down here it's really, really thin, so you'll have like a wavy pattern. So what I'm going to do is thin this out to match this. On this side I haven't even touched it. See how thick it is over here? Okay. And how thin it is over there, and that's what I want. This is ideal. This is what I want. I want it from here to here, and then just leave just enough meat on it, so when it goes to heat treat, it's fine, and then when it comes back, I could buff it clean. So I'm gonna kick on that one. All right. there you go. And I cleaned it. I don't know if you could see that, but let's get some light over here. Still a little thin here, but it's a lot thinner up here. I'll work on that in a minute. And I just strained out the grind on this side, and I strained out the grind on this side. I slipped a little bit up there, but that's fine, because when I sand all this out, it'll go nice and straight. That's how you get like a really nice grind. So there's a lot of guys that say, well, you know, I don't have a variable speed grinder. And I didn't have one when I first started either. So what you do is you take whatever grinder you have and you work with that. But the difference is that instead of using variable speed, you're going to use pressure. You're going to use pressure on your hands. This is your variable speed. And I'm going to set this up and show you how I do it. There's some guys that have the 1x30s. I have one of those as well. And you know, you just got to be patient with it. That's the only way it's going to work. You got to be slow, methodical, patient, and when you are working with the blade, you know, it's not push, push, push. It's drag, look, put it in the water, drag, look. And you know, I use high carbon steel, so the high carbon steel rusts when I put it in water, which is twofold. One, to cool off the blade, but also I can check where my grind lines are. All right, so I know where my grind lines are. If it's rusting in one area, then I say, all right, well, I'm not touching that. And that's, you could use marking dye too. I have nothing against marking dye. Marking dye is great. I would use that too, but I'll show you how to do this. Right, so same scenario. Just make sure when you put on your belt, you track it. See where it's at. This is the knife blade buff sander. Grizzly makes it. It's a lot cheaper than the other one, and it was one of my first production model type deals, and it's awesome. It still works awesome. I'm not going to sell it. I think it's a great addition to have two sanders, even if one's not variable speed. It works great. And I'm just going to tighten everything up, make sure it's all tight, ready to go. Make sure the tracking is good, and turn it on. Tracking is good. Take one of my blades, I need a little bit of work. Refine it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look behind it. Not putting a lot of pressure on it at all. Not putting a lot of pressure, just very lightly touching it. I'm looking at the back to see where I'm at. Checking the ricasso, making sure I don't overdo it. See how I took that line right off? Beep. Still a little bit up at the top. I don't want to go there, so I'm going to switch to the other side now. I have to move this camera. Work the ricasso a little bit. All right. So there you go. It's a little quicker, but you got to be very careful because you'll take a lot off very quickly. All right, notice I still have the round. I still have the round right here. It didn't go all the way to the top. It's clean, but I still have that little roundness, and that's what I want. Same on this side. See the round goes all the way to the top. And like I said, I don't want to make a divot here and then go that way. It happens. I've done it before. I hate the way it looks, but you know, the only way to fix that, if that happens, is to then go onto your platen, just hold it like that, and just let it run until you thin the knife out. And then when you thin the knife out, you know, it's no longer the thickness that you originally wanted, because now you're taking that off. What you can do is wait for heat treat now. The steel will be a lot harder, and you're less likely to make mistakes, you know, just because the steel will be a lot harder at that point, so you won't be taking off so much. You know, from this point on, after 60, I could do 120 and then 220. But what I also like to do is I use these Scotch-Brite. See that? These are Scotch-Brite. This one's pretty well used, but basically, you know the Scotch-Brite that you use to clean your kitchens? They made a belt out of it. I think 3M makes it. And there's coarse, fine, and medium. I always get coarse because after a while, like I said, when all the grit comes down from your blades, it's going to go to fine or medium grit anyway. So you might as well just buy coarse. That's another little tip right there. And these actually work really well. They do work well at taking the, let's see, this one was ground with it. They work well at evening out the steel, taking all the little dips and divots out. It will move sparks, so you will get some heat from it, and it will round out the ricasso. So you got to be aware of those two things right there. Make sure that you're not rounding it off too much, unless that's what you want. Alright guys, there's some examples of some flat grinding. Alright, these are 3/16, but as you can tell, just wipe it off a little bit. As you can tell, you know, nice flat grind, goes all the way to the top. You kind of want that little L bevel right there. It's not always, you know, it's really hard to achieve when you're first starting out, but as you get to learn your equipment and get to learn the steel and how you got to hold it, it becomes a lot easier. You know, on the big blades, it's not as noticeable. I kind of buffed them in a little bit, but you know, the idea behind the flat grind is it's a very utility type of grind. It's just based off of a very simple idea that you go from the thinnest point all the way to the spine itself, and of course the spine you leave it alone. You know, if you do a hollow grind, the ricasso will be a little bit more noticeable, but again, there's nothing wrong with the flat grind. I think the flat grind is a great grind, especially for beginners. You know, guys that are still learning the craft. You know, stick with the flat grind, get a platen, and learn how to work the steel. You know, a lot of guys say, well, you know, you can get a jig, or you can make a jig, and you can. There's nothing wrong with that. I have nothing against jigs, but the thing is that you're not refining your hand, you're not refining your eye when you use a jig. You're just taking a jig, slapping it on there, and just you know knocking it out. So if that jig breaks, or if you know that grinder breaks, then you know you're kind of on your own. So you know it's really up to you. This is just the way I do it. You know, you don't have to do it this way, but I like to constantly keep my skills fresh. Constantly know that I could walk up to any grinder and just throw some steel on it and then make the grinds that I want to make. You know, so you know, I hope this tutorial helped you guys out a little bit. You can go up to the website. As you can tell, these are going to be for sale. These are called the Mosquito. You can go up to the website, 3riverblades.com. Also, we just started Facebook, Twitter, and Google is also now available. You can check all that out on the website as well. Alright guys, hope to see you there.